Hi, Elaine. Long time no see.
Oh my gosh, it's been like forever.
It's too bad it reads backwards.
No, it says infectious.
Oh,
I'm looking at it straight. Well, now it starts. Now it's a cup.
it's a clothing company in Australia. Apparently, their clothes have some sort of antimicrobial in them. For their scrubs have antimicrobial surfaces to them, so they're anti-infectious, really.
That is cool.
Mhm. All right. I guess I could put my head on it and people could think I was infectious.
Well, we're on Zoom, so we'd be safe.
If I could make this into a background.
I think your head would be right in the middle of the word, though.
Well, I could try to put it off to the side. Hi. You know, this is all being recorded right now,
Yeah,
so we don't forget to do it later.
that's right.
Anything you say can and will be used against you. Hello, everybody. We'll get started soon enough. Thanks for joining us. Robert, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, Peter, happy to be here.
Got your puppy with you?
I do. Yeah, she's
can
right
introduce
by
her.
me.
You can introduce her in a little minute. We're going to get started right about now. Okay. I'm going to hit mute all, and then if I need to, I will unmute Robert. Where is Robert? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. Welcome to our weekly town hall. Today I am presenting our town hall from somewhere on the surface of the moon or some other planet. First and foremost, I hope you, your family, and colleagues are safe and well. These are truly unprecedented times, and each of us is dealing with an extraordinary and increasingly high level of complexity and uncertainty. We are all working through similar and greater challenges. How do we balance and respond to the day-to-day decisions we face while surrounding the needs, both physical and emotional, of our employees, customers, stakeholders, friends, family, and sometimes I feel the world? How do we make time and space to care for ourselves as well? We're all in this COVID-19 crisis and this, well, global crisis, this escalating crisis together. And a collective crisis requires collective solutions. Thank you for joining us on our weekly gathering to try to make sense of these unprecedented times for all of us. And I appreciate everybody finding some time in their days to be a part of it. Before I get started with my friend Robert, I just want to say a few words. As if things weren't difficult enough with the dealings of a virus and battling a virus, we have spent the last 9 or 10 days battling each other on a global basis. And I think we as a profession, we as an association, we as a region, we as human beings need to give each other a great big hug right now. I think we all, if I look at the names and I look at the people that we have that are a part of this call, and if I look at the names and the people that are a part of this association, and I see the people who come to our events, and I realize how globally diverse the SCVMA is and how globally diverse the veterinary profession is. And all I can say is please just support one another. all lives matter, Black lives matter, all lives matter, and we really need to just do everything that we can to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and taking care of the people around us and supporting ourselves and supporting the people around us. It's very difficult to watch the news every day. It's very difficult to read the Facebook posts and the other social media. And I thought it was hard for the past 77 days of being sheltered in place, and then the world exploded. So I ask all of you to just to think about the other person, take care of the people around you, and just be safe, and recognize that we're all in this together, even more so now than we've ever been. So thank you for allowing me to get on my little soapbox. So where does the veterinary profession stand on June the 4th, 2020? Seems to be doing pretty well from everything that I hear outside and out and about. Business sounds good. Life sounds good. SCVMA is doing everything we can to keep information flowing to you. We've got all sorts of continuing education programs scheduled. Mostly, well, virtually all virtual. That was redundant, wasn't it? All I can say is just let's keep taking care of our animals and take care of the animals. And I just want to crawl up on the floor with my dog every once in a while. The bird hasn't quite gotten attached to me yet, but the dog and everything else. So I have invited a guest to join us today. And Robert Sanchez and I get together every once in a while, either face-to-face when we could or virtually when we can. And we try to solve all of the world's problems. Robert's got a degree in philosophy. I have a C in philosophy, based upon looking at my grades from Cornell when I took a philosophy class. I use the opposite side of the brain than Robert does, but I do my best to hold my own in a conversation by nodding my head and saying, yep, whatever you say. Robert is a leader in this field. He is a member of the board of Vet Partners, which is the national consultants group. And Robert's company, Digital Empathy, is a website and social media and client service leader in the field. And Robert's got a philosophy and approach to veterinary medicine unlike anybody I've ever spoken with. So I appreciate him joining us today. And Robert, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peter. It means so much to have that kind of introduction from someone like you.
Well, checks in the mail. All right, so on your website, and let me do this, and Robert, I'm just going to do this to embarrass you.
Sure.
On your website, if I did this right, it should show your website.
Yeah.
Does it show that?
Yeah.
So on your website, in big bold letters, it says relationships matter.
Yeah.
Now, how hard is it as a web developer in the face of the current viral pandemic and other issues? How hard is it to build and foster relationships when eye contact is over a mask or through a digital camera?
It's very hard. Kind of part of the genesis as to why we exist and the way I think about things is that, we entered an age where the start of a relationship and much of the connectors in a mature relationship, it begins online. And we're just not built to connect that way, to build trust that way, to cooperate that way. And so now we're at a time where, not only does the relationship begin online, but we're robbed of some of that bedrock that we count on to build relationships. The ability to soak in somebody's nonverbal communication, to be able to look them in the eye and know that this is somebody who understands you, who sees you, and who has everything in control. So we're presented with a challenge like we haven't seen before. And it's one of the things I'm most concerned about now, because one of the things the field has going so well for it is there is this instinct that relationships are what matters. People know that this is really the way to build a sustainable practice, is to build strong relationships with the pet owners of your community. And the toolbox that we fall back on, there aren't as many tools there anymore. And so we need to think deeply about how do people connect, and how do we use what's available to us to bridge this gap as best as we can.
We've got some distributor reps and manufacturer reps that are with us today, and they're so used to face-to-face, going in, schmoozing,
Yeah.
lunch and learns. I've got to believe, and those of you who are in the distributor, manufacturer, and other worlds as reps, feel free to unmute yourself or just let me know and I'll unmute you. But it's got to be difficult for you guys to maintain relationships in an environment where you would rather be face-to-face than face-to-camera. Anybody want to weigh in? I mean, I don't want to call names, so I don't want to call anybody out, but if you'd like to say something, either unmute yourself or just drop your name in the chat and I'll go ahead and unmute you, because I find it really difficult right now personally to not have the ability to go and sit across the table from Robert, and it just makes it a much more difficult fashion. So I've got to believe that our reps are dealing with it. I know our veterinarians are dealing with it, and I know that because they want to go back to, well, I think last week or the week before, within a day, I received 4 or 5 emails that says, when can we open up our exam rooms again? And I said, well, after you get the dust and cobwebs down. But it's really, I think there's a need and a desire to get back to people. I don't think that the human, now I'm going to get into your philosophy side, Robert. I don't think the human being was created to be an isolationist. And I guess that's why they put prisoners in solitary confinement. So what's your take on the average human being's ability to remain isolated?
I think because we're in a crisis, really kind of two crises now, there's a third lurking that we don't really talk about. There's another epidemic, and it's a mental health crisis. I think I would suspect that if there were a robust study about the emotional well-being of people right now, it would be very troubling to see where a lot of people are. I can tell you, so I live alone. I don't have a whole lot of contact with the outside world, and I can be pretty introverted, but I still struggle with it sometimes. And so it must be so difficult for a lot of people out there who don't have touch or connection. There's a reason why solitary confinement is often labeled as cruel and unusual, because it's not the world we're built for. It robs us of something basic within our humanity, and it makes us feel almost like an emptiness. So it's very distressing to me to see that people are so isolated, because we're probably going to have at least the embers of a mental health crisis after this too.
I'm a veterinarian. I don't have a degree in psychology or psychiatry, but I would fathom a guess that a lot of the escalation of the events over the past 10 days comes from a lot of this forced isolation and its ultimate impact on the mental health of individuals, and a desire to go out and interact in some way, shape, or form. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and this is something I've been thinking about too. You know, it's heartbreaking to see. I think there is very natural venting of this need to be connected to something important, and to stand by and connect with people. And I think ultimately, you know, it's what we're seeing is very healthy. This nation has needed to say no more for a long time. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing there was this kind of perfect storm of affects, right? Of emotions. And the nation saw something that very clearly was wrong. And it was a symptom of a disease that's very, very ugly. And because of that, in the heightened state of emotions, there was this the enormous release that has been channeled. And so it's hard to see. It's even hard for me to talk about, but ultimately I do look at it as something that's quite healthy, because we needed to say no more.
It's almost like the center of an atom, and the pressure that gets built up in that nucleus and eventually releases itself. It goes back to the atomic bomb in many ways.
Right. Yeah, just the amount of energy that's been bound up that has had no channel of escape. Yeah.
So I can't think of a company in the veterinary sector that has had the gumption and the guts to put the word empathy in its name. Now, it is front and center, right next to the giraffe, of your company, and it's in your bloodstream from my experiences with you. How can practices be empathic in the face of the multiple whammies that we're living through?
Yeah. So I think there are kind of two levels to this. There's a short term and there's a long term. So I think if we're looking at kind of triaging this and, you know, making sure that we find a good path that we can take tomorrow and next week and next month, what we have to do is think from their perspective. We have to, I mean, that's what empathy is at its core, is internalizing the emotional state of another person. And for the long term, I'll talk a little bit about like what we can do to boost that. But for the short term, I think one thing I would do is I would jot down the main types of visits that people have with you now. You know, well, sick, if there's anything else that you want to account for, that sort of thing. Map out what the different steps of that visit look like, you know. Pulling up into the driveway, calling me the first time, waiting in the car, performing the exam while I'm outside, discharge, and follow up, whatever it is for you. And thinking about what's the likely experience and emotional state that this person is in at this time. You know, so I'll share with all of you. So I had something kind of scary happen today. with Lula, the dog that Peter was referring to. So she was in some pretty obvious discomfort this morning, and it happened right after she went outside to defecate. And so she was whining and she was panting and she was kind of signaling to me that she was really uncomfortable. So I called my vet, and they were unable to get me in. So I took her to California veterinary specialists, where I've had her seen before. And I was able to kind of live this experience that I'll actually talk about in that we've seen so far in the industry with curbside care. And it was my first time seeing it since this happened. And so I think if we were able to really kind of reverse engineer how people are experiencing veterinary care with this model right now, and pay more attention to what does this person really need in this moment during this visit. And I'm not just talking about logical information. What do they need emotionally? What's gonna bring them to this point? And then think about how we would want to feel in that kind of situation, and create tactics and strategies that would address that, our emotional well-being. I think that would be a really good first step to creating much more empathetic visits. And then long-term, I would say meditation. I think this is something I think is important, and I would love to bring to the public consciousness more. The adopting a meditation practice, taking 20 minutes out of your day to watch your breath, to be objective about what you're seeing. Meditation, essentially, it's not about working yourself into a trance. It's about learning how to observe what's happening in your own mind in kind of a distance and separated way. And there have been studies that prove that it improves our ability to sense another's emotional states when you do that. So for the long term, I'd say adopt a practice of meditation, and you'll probably become a more empathetic individual. You might even become happier.
That's an interesting discussion. I have an app on my watch, I guess it's on my phone too, called Breathe. And every hour or so, it vibrates my wrist and says, take a minute to take some deep breaths. Yeah. And I think that if we don't, we are so programmed right now as people, that if we don't program it onto our calendar, it doesn't happen. Yeah. So whether you have an Apple Watch, whether you have an iPhone, or whether you have some other technology, you might take advantage of technology to give you a buzz, a beep, a jolt, a taser, I don't know, to take a minute and take a deep breath. And I think the other thing to do is think between each appointment, take a deep breath and just clear your brain, clear your mind, and start fresh with each appointment. It's interesting, you and Lula had an experience even today. My dog had some neck pain earlier in the week, and I feel so weak and so lame because I don't have an x-ray unit at home. Yeah. I don't have a lab equipment at home. So I had my wife bring Wiblet in and go through the process. Now, Sharon used to work in a veterinary hospital, or a couple of different veterinary hospitals, so she knows the normal drill. And so she had the experience of the curbside check-in. And I've got to believe, as a consumer, that leaving the pet in the hands of somebody that you, air quotes, trust, but you don't know, challenges the pet owner's comfort. And so when you're talking about the client experience and reverse engineering, it would be very interesting to figure out how you can make that client feel more comfortable when they are having their four-legged family member separated from them for services when they were used to being in the room with you, et cetera. So I that's one of the touch points that I can see.
Yeah. And you know, I think this is where the largest hole is in the experience, is this black hole that happens after, you know, the technician takes your pet into the building, and then you wait for the phone call after the exam, right? And for me, that was the most anxious time of the visit, you know, because I'm thinking, um, you know, what's happening? Are they going to find something terrible? This is taking a little bit longer. Does that mean that they've found something that they need to check out further and I should be worried? And it's this constant stream of thoughts that the pet owner's probably doing their best to distract themselves with, like on their phone or something like that. That's what I was trying to do. Until you finally get that phone call and you hear what the veterinary practitioner has to say. And I think this is not workable, at least for most pet owners. The pet owners with the level of concern and anxiety I get over health issues with my pet, this is not an ideal solution. What I would do if I were a practice, I mean, we don't have to let this be the solution. There are digital tools now that we can use that can at least do a decent job at bridging this gap. What I would do is, for every exam room that you'd have, I'd go on Amazon and I'd buy a smartphone tripod. They're like, you can get them between 30 and 50 bucks. And I'd have it set up so that what the receptionist does is she texts you, the practitioner, and the client who's waiting for the pet, the same Google Meet room, or use FaceTime, and have the exam truly virtually, where, you know, as soon as you take Lula into the room with you, I see what's happening. I'm not filled with this void that I have no idea what's going on. I don't know if it's good or it's bad. And it would be so comforting to me to see like what's happening as if I were there. And you know, I'm also anxious about how Lula feels right now. I'm not with her. That's not usual for her. You know, she never goes anywhere without me. And so I think the ability to really be thoughtful about making this seem less of a black hole and using some really simple technological solutions to allow somebody to watch the visit would be a much better way forward than what we've seen.
Yeah, I love that concept of a virtual visual exam from 50 yards away in the parking lot from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So you can do it through FaceTime. You could actually do it through a Zoom account.
Yeah.
You could do it through any of a number of different avenues, and it may actually expedite that client experience because you can talk the client through the exam and your findings, and you don't have to stop and communicate it to the client. And then, you know, so it allows for two-way conversation and communication. So I think that's a great concept and thought from that standpoint. This concept of reverse engineering the client experience, I've actually done some talks on it where you actually map the client experience from start to finish. If you're a consumer of veterinary services, let's take your digital empathy hat off, but you are a consumer of veterinary care. If you were to look down the road and look to help a practice improve that client experience, your client experience with Lula, what are some of the messaging that you would give that practice to help with the client experience, and recognizing that there's like 1,000 moving parts from the start to finish of a client experience?
Yeah. So it's a great question. You know, to me, it always comes back to, what do we look for? And I'm not talking about what do we look for in veterinary care. That's of course part of it, but I mean, what do we look for as humans? What do we need? I think the veterinary practices that are most successful, it's not necessarily the level of medicine they practice, it's how they make their clients feel. And how you make your clients feel is directly related to what human needs you're really working to help. So I think having a basic understanding of what those needs are, and you know, to me, there are really four that I spend time thinking about. The first is safety. So I think when people hear safety, they think physical safety. And while that's even more, I usually say that's not really relevant. Right now it is. It's more emotional safety that practices need to be thinking about than is typical with the baseline. You know, and this is essentially what I'm talking about here with the need for video instead of just this black hole, right? I did not feel emotionally safe. I was concerned, I was worried, I didn't feel good. I didn't blame at all the practice, but if you don't think this was an opportunity for that practice to really bond with me, you're missing something. So I think really thinking about, how do we make people feel emotionally safe? What does that look like? Those are the kinds of environments we're drawn to. The second is belonging. We want to feel like we belong. And a lot of practices really speak to creating a family style environment. This is they know instinctually that this is important, right? Is the ability for somebody to walk in, or now be greeted over the phone and to be seen on video, like this is truly their tribe. Like this is their home. You know, these are people that get them and watch their backs. The third is status and esteem. We want to feel like we matter. We want to feel like we're important, you know, adopting something of having the blend between a warmth and almost like a celebrity culture, so that you make somebody feel like you're the most important part of their day, right? Or rather, I mean, they're the most important part of your day, the practitioner. That makes me feel like I matter. And then love, to really understand what matters to me in connecting with my pet, what I want out of this. Because ultimately, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way at all, but veterinary practitioners are a means to an end. You know, my end is being Lula's hero and taking care of her so that she has the best life possible by my side, and we both get as much out of the relationship as possible. Even just saying that, it, you know, kind of chokes me up thinking about it, because it matters so much to me. So what I would do is I would say, here are these 4 needs that all of our clients have. And I promise you, what hurts is we're pretending that we're different, but it's a goddamn lie. We're all the same. We all want the same things. We just look for them in different places. And so recognizing that these are the 4 things that people need. And I'm not just talking, by the way, about pet owners. It's your team too. And designing an experience that works backwards, that says, this is how we're going to help them feel these things. That's how you build a special kind of practice.
Yeah, my next question to you, which you kind of answered and wasn't part of the discussion that we had in preparation, was these 4 human needs: safety, belonging, status, and love. That's all well and good for you as the pet owner, but I own the hospital. How do I take those 4 human needs and meet those within my team? Because honestly, if I can't, as a leader, give my team that feeling, isn't it going to be hard for them to give that feeling to clients as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's primary. It's more important than focusing on, like, if I were being exposed to this kind of thinking for the first time, I wouldn't think immediately, how do I do this for clients? I would think immediately about, how would I do this for my team so that they can do it for clients, right? Because if you have a team that feels unsafe emotionally, that's constantly worried about their performance or their jobs or their livelihood or whatever, they're going to underperform, and they're not going to have the mental bandwidth to really be empathetic to what people need here. If they don't feel important, they're not going to actualize. If they don't feel like they belong, they're going to look for somewhere else. And if you're not helping them find a deeper connection to purpose, to whatever they love in life, they're going to feel unfulfilled. And so, I think one of the really good ways to bring this home is to give you an example. I don't want to be too ethereal and abstract. I've been accused of that before as someone having a philosophy background. So
No, not you.
um, so the example that I like would be, say there's a technician in your practice, and we'll call her Liza. And Liza administers the wrong medication to a pet before anesthesia, and it goes badly, right? And maybe the pet doesn't die, but this is a really scary situation. And so you bring Liza into your room and you say, listen, Liza, we can't have these mistakes. You've made too many of them. And this one was really serious. You got to clean up your act or we just can't have you here, right? Now, I promise you, Liza's going to walk out of that room really, really wanting to do better. And she's probably not going to, because what she's going to be thinking about, her mind is going to be filled with these thoughts and concerns about her own performance. I got to do this right. Am I doing this right? She's not just going to be present in the moment and letting her skills flow through her. Her mind is going to be wrapping onto self-doubt. And nobody reaches peak performance when they're worried about self-doubt. Now, what if instead you brought her into your room after that and you said, Liza, sit down. When I graduated from veterinary school, I was putting in an IV catheter and I didn't get the placement right. And it caused some pretty serious health repercussions because I didn't notice. And I thought, how could I be that stupid? How could I make that kind of mistake? And it got me thinking, I'm not cut out for this. I screwed this up. I'm going to screw it up again. It's going to cost lives. I can't do this. And you know what, Liza? I realized that wasn't true. I could do this. And you can too. Now, what can I do to help you? So instead, creating this environment where you relate with somebody, you've got to go from the person who fixes mistakes and corrects errors to somebody who truly provides your team with a space of emotional safety and then guides them to where they want to get to. If you can provide somebody with that, I promise you, not only is that bond of trust going to be built, but I'm going to walk out of that meeting with something that's actually valuable towards improving as a team member and believing in myself. And honestly, the most precious gift that we can give somebody is belief in themselves. It's what so many people are hungry for and don't feel. And that's our job as leaders.
That's an amazing scenario to talk about. As you're talking about it, I'm thinking about when I used to play tennis, and it's like, don't double fault, don't double fault, don't double fault. And what do?
Yeah, right.
It's like, don't strike out, don't strike out, don't strike out. And then you swing at a pitch that's nowhere near. So
right.
If my mindset is I'm gonna ace the player, or I'm gonna hit a home run, you're gonna have a better outcome. So it's in your mindset. Now, as somebody who went to veterinary school, and we've got veterinarians on the call, we've got technicians on the call. We weren't provided resources on this sort of knowledge. Do you have some books that you recommend, or authors or speakers besides yourself that you might suggest veterinarians read or look at to help them?
Yeah. One of my favorite books on leadership. So, Peter and I will often talk about Simon Sinek. I think he comes with such an interesting perspective, which is really kind of like an anthropological look at corporate behavior, which I think is very useful and edifying. He wrote a book called Leaders Eat Last, which is, yeah, it's essentially about the primary functions of a leader. And as a leader, which I'm sure everyone on this call is, because everyone can and should be, and especially those in positions of authority, you have two primary functions: the safety of your tribe, drawing a circle around every single person there and saying, I'm going to protect you from threats. Threats are not going to come from inside the circle, and I'm going to insulate us all from threats outside the circle. And number two, providing the tribe with a very clear path to walk, right? To say, this is where we're trying to get to. This is where we need to go. I'm going to go first, and I'm going to show you the way, right? And so what the book does is it really kind of breaks down how those kinds of scenarios play out and gives you strategy and tactics as to how to really kind of bring that into your way of thinking, and you know, doing business, and for you, practicing medicine.
I took two quotes from that book recently, and I can't even remember which article or where it was. So yeah, Simon Sinek is a great resource on that. And then Start With Why, his other book, because I think a lot of it in our hospitals, it means bringing everybody back to the why, and the way we treat people from that standpoint. So while you keep reaching for your water bottle, would you reach down for Lula and show everybody what Lula looks like? I'm going to stop the screen sharing so that they can see what Lula looks like. And I'm going to
She's the star
right there. All right.
She was getting very upset with me for not petting her, so that's why I was reaching down.
Well, I thought I would allow you to have her as front and center. So you're now the center screen and not your website. But it does allow me to go to a question that says, okay, we talked about the client experience, and we talked about the client experience at the hospital. Will you create a touch point before they get to the hospital? How do you create a website that grows the client experience, adds to the client experience, and oozes relationships and empathy?
Yeah, great question. And you know, I think this is where a lot of practices don't really think is, you know, you'll ask, and I hear you ask this question, where does the relationship start? Where does the experience start? I think probably the most common answer would either be on the first phone call or when somebody walks through the door. And that we are days behind at that point. You know, that is not where, when the internet was so disruptive because it fundamentally changed the way that we connect with people and businesses, right? And so I think that having the right kind of website is not going to suddenly make your practice transform. What it's going to do is it's going to be a hell of a first date. And the way that you do that is you realize that the real question that somebody's asking at this point in the relationship, not unlike at later stages, is, can I trust you? You know, that's what we are unconsciously trying to suss out. This is about how we work instinctually in social cooperation. It's what we're trying to find. Who's safe to cooperate with? Who has my back? Who understands me? Who sees me and is going to help me in my time of need? And so there are quick tactics that you can use to be effective with your website, but ultimately I think it's a different way of speaking to people. And so the example that I always give, so what you need to do fundamentally is, so the website needs to have an aesthetic that is that's modern, that shows that everything that you do is really thoughtful. But most importantly, it needs to be authentic with who you are as a brand and what you believe. It needs to speak to that, and there needs to be real messaging. There needs to be a lot more of a focus on how I speak to people through my website. So like ours says relationships matter, right? Because that's what people need to understand, that that's what this is about. This is not about websites. This is about people. This is just about giving them, you know, what I saw when I started this company is that we got so far down the road of building websites because it was clear that people are now using this to connect with businesses, that we never figured out our first principles. We never figured out the foundation to start with. And the first principles have everything to do with human psychology and people and how we form relationships. So the example that I can give you, and Peter, forgive me because I'm sure you've heard this before because I'll do this in most of my talks, is almost the entire industry communicates like this on their website. Welcome to ABC Animal Hospital. We're a full service veterinary facility. We provide preventive care, spay, neuter, parasite control, and more. Give us a call and come on in. And that, I suppose, is the value proposition that you're pitching to them. And it makes me feel nothing. You know, the only thing that it shows me is that you're in practice, right? You have a veterinary practice. Fantastic. It doesn't answer the real question I'm asking, which is, can I trust you? Now, the way you answer that is through story. It's through speaking through your customer's eyes in a way. So I think the good question to ask is, if Steve Jobs showed up at your door one day and you asked him, how should I market my practice? I think he would tell you to talk more like this. She's there for you when life is hard. She's there for you when work is stressful. She's there for you when you need a friend. Now you get to be there for her. Give us a call and let's protect her together. And you spoke to my limbic brain. You spoke to what actually I care about. You told a story that matters to me and you moved me. And so what I would do, it can't just be that on your website. It should be your story, a story of your beliefs and your values and how you are so uniquely set up to care for the specific type of client and patient that you want to care for. And so blending together the right kinds of aesthetics, the right kinds of video, and you know, one thing I'm very fond of is the first impression that somebody gets on your website, right? The fold of the website, we call it the hero. That should probably be an HTML5 video of you and your team doing what they do best, right? I want to feel like I'm there with you. And then the right kinds of messaging. And this is really, you know, it's the core of your beliefs and your philosophy. It might be every pet like our own. It might be, you know, whatever it is for you. And then telling that story and making somebody feel like they really know you, but more importantly, like you really know them. I think that's the opportunity.
I could embarrass you and share some of the websites, but I will just tell people to go to your website itself and they can find some of those examples. You know, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and I made a note to say, was this your intention today to have the Steve Jobs look?
Oh God, I'm not in a turtleneck. I do have the the black though. Yeah, I threaten my team with ordering a turtleneck every other week.
How about the use of social media? Can social media be used effectively as an empathy tool?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I say this very cognizant that there are dangers to social media too, right? It can be used to divide us. And I think that's kind of one of the things that we've seen is social media often creates these echo chambers that make us feel hyper tribalized. And that to me is very, very sad. But like any tool, there's always going to be, any tool that has strength, there are going to be negative consequences of it. How do we look at the really positive consequences of it and optimize for those? And there are easy ways to do that. So I think really adopting this storytelling approach through social media is also very fruitful. I look at it as having different buckets of what you should be posting on, and then just basic standards of how you respond to people and communicate with people and address emotions on social media. To me, the most important bucket would be sharing impact stories. So, you know, I bet a lot of people on this call have been involved in saving a life sometime in the last week or two, right? Maybe multiple instances. What social does so well is it allows us to connect with others in a way that is so much more collaborative and visual than it's been in the past. And so sharing that kind of story, but focusing on really what the meaning was behind that story. And the meaning wasn't what you did there, it's what came after. So I'll give you an example. You know, say there was a dog that came in that got hit by a car, and their owner brought you the dog in tears, and you had to rush into emergency surgery. And after 4 hours, you brought that dog out, and the owner and the dog were given a second chance at life together. And I think, obviously you need permission, but chronicling that, showing a picture of the owner and the pet together after, the love there, and then sharing the story. And the magical thing is truly not that emergency surgery or the heroic feats that happened within that surgical exam room. The magic is what comes after that. It's all of those moments that person and that animal are going to be able to share together, right? That's what you gave them. And that's something that we as animal lovers, which is your tribe, can all really connect with. That's the kind of stuff that goes viral. If you're looking for something to really dramatically increase the amount of people who are bonded to your practice, to get into second degree networks, the people who are friends with your clients, and thus are the right kind of people to be in front of, that's the primary bucket. And there are other things that you can be posting on too. I also really think you should use social to keep your community educated about important issues, to really be the guide through this pandemic, through common health and behavioral issues with pets, everything they need to know. But really being thoughtful about the role that you play in this relationship, what it is at the core that you're doing for them, sharing these incredible stories as they happen, and reinforcing your position as the guide. Some really tangible, positive things can come out of social media efforts if you do that.
Well, I think I'd like to allow the people who are on the call to ask questions if they have, or put some comments in the chat. The chat box is down below in the toolbar. You know, just if you got something to share with Robert, or if you have any questions for him, don't hesitate. We will, this has been recorded, and we will share it with our membership. And if you feel that any of your team members could benefit from this, any of the leaders could benefit from it, or other practices, especially since we've got a lot of representatives in industry, you know, I think Robert's messaging is one that doesn't get heard that often in the profession. I think I'm glad to be able to have given him a platform today to share some thoughts that are using the opposite side of the brain than I use most of the time. And as we see if there's any comments or chat, what's your general take? You've got practices all over the country. What's your general take in talking to practices about how people are doing? I mean, just what's your take from that standpoint?
Yeah, and I think kind of like what's behind everything is that people are hungry for leadership. I think that's one thing that's been missing through this pandemic, and honestly, it's something I respect you a whole lot for, Peter, is being that in a time where we so sorely need it and look for it. As far as particulars of emotional states, what I saw in the conversations that I had, and you know, my team's conversations, and it really matters to me, the kind, as you can expect, the kind of relationships that we have with our clients and how we're helping them. So I tend to stay privy to what's going on. I think in the middle of March, there was a lot of fear and there was a lot of uncertainty, right? It was that day, and I can pinpoint the day. It's when the NBA shut down, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it was March 12th or 13th.
Yeah.
Like that.
And that was the oh shit moment, right? It's like, something's coming. This is real. This is not usual that this happens, right? There was everything before this was really abstract, and that kind of made it real for everyone. And so, and then we start getting this, just the drip, and then this flood of bad and scary news. And so I think that middle of March to late March was probably, and I say this, and I don't know if anyone's been affected, and if you have, different times were more emotionally heightened, but for most of the public, I think the middle and late March, it was like it was the devil you don't know, right? It was scary, and we saw panic, and so practices had people who didn't want to come into work, who didn't feel safe at work. They had clients who didn't want to come in. They didn't know what to do. They didn't feel safe. And it wasn't clear at the time that veterinarians would be labeled an essential business in all the states. So there was just so much uncertainty about what's going to happen, and uncertainty is terrible to deal with. And April was hardest probably for the headlines, a lot of suffering that's happened in this industry. But I think there was also a realization that we can keep things afloat while this is happening from within the veterinary industry, at least for a lot of practices out there. And then in May, we've kind of seen a back to business recovery, like, all right, well, we got to do things differently right now, but we're still working. People are still coming in. We've made these adjustments that we've had to make, and let's make sure that we're using our time as wisely as possible. So, and I think the emotional undercurrents kind of followed with that. The first stage of panic, that was hard. I'm really proud of the company that we've built. And in the middle of March and late March, I had a panic attack. I thought, oh my God, like, is this it? Like, is everything going to be taken away by this? And what about my parents? Like, what's going to happen with them? And it was scary. And I try not to rattle easily, but I felt rattled. And then, in April, I think the underlying emotional state was tense, but also there was more of an optimism that we're going to survive this. And then May, we kind of got proof that, yeah, we can do this. And, and like what I can tell you is in April, we saw like one inbound lead, which is really atypical for us. And it's because when people are worried about their own survival, they're not making decisions for their long-term future. But then in May, kind of this significant increase came in, and it mimics, if you look at the revenue tracker from like Vet Success and you see what's going on in the industry, is that there has been this real recovery. So that's kind of what I've seen from my perspective, and my hope is that it continues.
Well, Robert, digitalepathyvet.com, digitalepathyvet.com. Send Robert a message, let him know what you think of him and the conversation. If you like what you heard, Robert also does speaking. He's been speaking at many of the major meetings. But the websites that he creates touch on empathy, they touch on relationships, and it's a different thought and a different outlook. On behalf of the SCVMA and myself, Robert, thank you very much for taking some time away and joining us. couple of quick notes to wrap up with. We've got CE on Monday. We've got a town hall on Thursday of next week. Next week's town hall is entitled, Is It Safe to Go Inside Yet? About starting to bring people into our practices. We've got a virtual CE every week. I'm working through July and August right now. Hopefully we'll have some live CE coming up in October. So I want to tell you a quick Zoom story before, as we wrap it up, just to give everybody a laugh. I was talking to a friend of mine. Feel free to bring Lula back up and we can say goodbye to her. But I was talking to a friend of mine who did a Zoom meeting last night. It was a nighttime meeting, started at 7, went to almost at 9. And towards the end of the meeting, one of the participants sitting there watching had his camera on and probably didn't know it. The computer was in the bedroom, and he stood up from the chair that he was on, stretched himself out, and let's just say he had a little bit of extra weight, so his shirt rode up, you know, and the belly shone, and so he got into bed, and with the camera still on and still going, and the light of the camera was reflected on the bed, so you could still see him in bed. And then he got up and still not knowing that his camera was on, went over towards where the computer screen was and just started to scratch through his tighty whities. And just to give you an idea that make sure you've got your camera off before you get onto a Zoom meeting. I know that the speaker who could see him and the sponsors who could see him had a very difficult time wrapping up the meeting. But when Kelly was telling me this story this morning, I had a hard time keeping my car on the road and not laughing, which is why we do these things at 12:30 in the afternoon and I'm at my office because I don't want to catch anybody. On behalf of the SCVMA, thank you, Robert. Thanks to all our members who have been a part of this. And we will look forward to keeping you smiling and keeping you updated next week. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter.